So I want to welcome all of you this evening. And in just a moment, I'll do a little bit of introduction. I'll introduce myself and Andrew. Um, Hopefully, I think you probably know either one of us or both of us, but we'll do some formal introductions here in a second, and then I'll open us with a word of prayer. But if you would, I would love it if you would let us know in the chat box why you came tonight, what you hope to gain from this webinar. It'd be fun to hear from you for just a second. And while you are answering that, while you're throwing those in and folks are joining the meeting, I'll take just a second and introduce myself and then introduce Andrew. My name is Scott Postma, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the president and currently CEO of Kepler Education. We're an online platform that offers classical Christian education, or we should say, probably more accurately, allows teachers to offer Christian classical education, and we help facilitate that. And so I'll say a little bit more about Kepler in a moment, but I've been involved in classical education for just over 10 years, about 12 years now, and in education, in Christian education, nearly 30 years, church planting and starting schools. And so there's been a lot of shift for me, a lot of learning over the past decade or so. It was as I was introduced to classical education. So I'm honored to be here this evening with Andrew Kern, who is president of the CiRCE Institute. And in all honesty, Andrew, I think of you as kind of a fixture in the Christian classical renewal. And I mean that in the best possible way. One of the most humble and knowledgeable men that I've met in my life in the area of education. And I don't want to steal Andrew's thunder because he's going to talk about CiRCE here in a few moments. But one of the reasons that we're really excited about this endeavor has a lot to do with the kind of gravitas that CiRCE has brought to Christian classical education. And the four things that I would just mention briefly that I think and hope that Andrew will elaborate on is the way that CiRCE has, and we could talk about the national conference and a lot of the other things, but the way that CiRCE has really lifted Christian classical education to a higher plane through the promotion of, particularly with norms and nobility and advancing David Hicks' work. I really feel like that has been a huge contribution to the renewal. The mimetic approach to education, and this is something that probably at another time we could talk more about, but the idea that education is an inheritance is really important. And I know that we could talk everything from philosophy to methodologies with the mimetic approach to education, but there's something to be said about essence preceding our ability to express or self-actualize, and that has something to do with the way we learn. And I just really appreciate the fact that you guys emphasize this in your mimetic approach to learning. The apprenticeship program has become probably one of the greatest staples. More and more I meet teachers that have gone through the apprenticeship program, and so we're seeing a lot of teachers in the field that have learned through CiRCE. And then, of course, Lost Tools of Writing is a fabulous curriculum that really brings a practical approach to junior high students and above to learn how to write. Good writing is clear thinking made visible. And if we can't think, we can't write. If we can't write, we can't think. And so I really appreciate that. So with that brief introduction, I would like if you would join me just for a brief word of prayer as we open. And then I'd like to turn the meeting over to Andrew, let him talk a little bit about CiRCE and say more about that, as well as we'll talk about this jointure, and then we'll follow up with some question and answer. And that's kind of the agenda tonight. So if you would.
Scott, I'm not leaving. I'm just stepping away from the camera for a moment. I'll be right back.
Yes. Please join me for prayer if you would. Gracious Father, we are delighted to be here this evening, and I thank you for each and every participant that is here. And we come to you in the strong name of your Son, our Lord and brother Jesus Christ, and ask you to grant us humility that we might learn, wisdom that we might be able to serve well, and the courage to do those things that we're called to do as educators, that we might serve the common good and human flourishing. And so tonight, Lord, we pray that you would bless this hour that we have together, that we would leave here having gained something. And we ask all of these things in your Son's righteous name. Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Andrew, why don't you get us started this evening, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about CiRCE, your history, and maybe tell us a little bit about your vision for Christian classical education.
Sure. Thank you so much. The first thing I'd like to say is that, and this will come up more later, but I am so pleased that we're doing this tonight because it means that an arrangement, a jointure is happening between Kepler and CiRCE. And when we started looking at some strategic changes we needed to make, Kepler immediately, without any hesitation, popped into my mind as an organization that we wanted to work with. And so to be with you tonight and to be with your community tonight is really, I say tonight because it's 7 o'clock where I am, but it's such a privilege. And Scott, thank you, and thank you to the whole Kepler team. As far as CiRCE goes, the easiest way to tell our story might be that in 1993, I was in, I won't say despair, but I had concluded that there was no way I was going to follow the conventional modes of education and raising my children. And so we started, Karen and I and my family and a few other families started a school in Green Bay, Wisconsin called Providence Academy. And that was a classical school. Almost immediately, I became aware of the fact that if this classical renewal was going to flourish, I was going to have to learn how to teach myself. And the renewal was going to have to rethink teaching. In other words, the way teaching was being done. And for those of you who maybe think the 90s were the golden age, let me assure you that it was not. It was not the golden age of education. Teaching, well, I'll say this, teaching has always been mostly bad in any age. That's just, teaching is a very difficult thing to do. It's a little bit like saying most soccer players don't make it to the World Cup, it's teaching's always hard, but some cultures have a good concept of teaching. And from the early 20th century to the late 20th century, there was a rapid decline. So sorry to go into that. Just to make the point that immediately I realized that we were going to have to engage in a lot of teacher development, teacher training, teacher discipleship. And so I was doing in-house teacher training right off the bat because I was older. I was in my 30s by then. I had been a youth pastor. I had done teaching in various settings and so on. So what I drew from other settings I was using in the school setting. But in 2005, having moved from Green Bay to Boise, and then from Boise to Charlotte, and then from Charlotte to Concord, which is external people would say a suburb of Charlotte. Don't tell Concord Heights that, but anyway, so we started an apprenticeship in 2005 because people were asking me to just help them learn how to teach better. And I think that was the decisive moment in our existence as an institution. Around that time, we were putting out the Lost Tools of Writing that you mentioned earlier. I was teaching afternoon classes to homeschool students as well as day classes to, well, earlier I had been teaching day classes in Boise, in fact, and I continued to teach afternoon classes to high school students, which were what now you might call a humane letters class. We met twice a week. I was teaching them how to read and how to write, basically, and how to have a discussion, how to deliberate, let's say. And all of that came together in our apprenticeship and in the development of the Lost Tools of Writing. And I think that's probably a good way to summarize who we are at the Institute, is that we are committed to discipling teachers, we are committed to discipling students, and we are committed to providing resources for teachers and students in schools. The other thing I'll add to it is that I did write a book back in the 90s, the first version called Classical Education, The Movement Sweeping America. I will not take the blame for the subtitle. I will take the blame for the title. And that really led to the formation of CiRCE as a research institute. So you might put it this way, that if you summarize what CiRCE is, we are a research institute that picked up this golden jewel, this treasure called Christian classical education, and said, wow, this is beautiful. What is it? And for 30 years, we've been asking that question, what is it? And so from that research comes consulting or training and apprenticeship. On the one hand, training, development, and on the other hand, resources, especially the Lost Tools of Writing. And so now with Matt Bianco, many of you will know Matt Bianco, Andrea Lipinski, Katerina Hamilton, Buck Holler, and a number of others that I can't go through all the names right now. We've been continuing to do the research, continuing to apprentice, continuing to coach teachers, and continuing to develop resources. So that's the CiRCE Institute.
Fabulous. I'm once again, I'm excited when we heard about this opportunity. I was just thrilled, just given the influence that Andrew's had. And I also just want to briefly mention, as I talk about Kepler, we have another friend with us tonight. I mean, a lot of friends that are joining us, but Andrew Pudwa, thanks
Oh, hello, Andrew.
thanks for being with us this evening. We're honored that you would visit with us.
Yeah.
Kepler really started as kind of a brainchild. I think I would say. I hope Daniel would agree with this. A brainchild between Daniel Fukushan and I, strategically trying to think about how to serve families who need classical education, want access to it, but may not have access for a variety of reasons. And the Roman Roads Live Classroom at that time was growing, and it wasn't really part of their vision. Just like what Andrew was just describing with their focus, Roman Roads was focused on curriculum, and so through some prayer and thinking through some ideas, Kepler was launched in 2019 with the goal of hosting our first classes in the fall of 2020. Well, as you know, that was right about the time the whole COVID thing went crazy. And so we had teachers, and this is really thrilling to me because it only just confirmed the caliber of teachers we had. That teachers we were just in the process of onboarding, getting their courses set up, and said, could we scramble and offer free courses to students who are being displaced? And can we help that? And I think we had somewhere close to 300 registrations without even doing any kind of really promotion. We offered $1 classes, and the $1 was because the platform required we had some kind of transaction that happened. And so teachers scrambled to do that, and Kepler was born in that fashion, in sort of a necessity moment. But our plan was to launch in the fall of 2020 and really provide a platform where quality classical educators who are Christian, and this would be a time to talk about our kind of our core values. We're mere Christian, we're broadly classical, and what we call Burkean or historically conservative. And we wanted to give, I'll say more about that in a moment, but wanted to give teachers that shared that same vision, the same core values, a platform where they could reach students and make their courses accessible. A lot of teachers at this time were attempting to offer their courses online to students and trying to find a way of facilitating that. And so Kepler's mission really came together to provide the platform, some of the administrative apparatus for teachers to be able to do what they do best and teach and connect with families. So part of our mission and our philosophy is always to try to keep the administration as lean as possible and keep it behind the teachers. I administrated 2 brick and mortar schools. My wife was principal of one of them, and she could attest to this. But there's a certain kind of encroachment that administrative duties tend to have on any kind of school by nature, without even trying. It tends to kind of creep in because you're trying to take care of things. And so we wanted to be very intentional in making sure that didn't overpower what the teachers were there to do. And so Kepler currently now with close to 100 different teachers offering more than 100 classes, not all at the same time. We're a platform that leverages technology so that classical Christian educators can get their courses out in front of homeschool students, startup schools who are needing a teacher, but as they're getting started, or co-ops getting started, can't afford to bring in a teacher, and so we can pipe a teacher in temporarily. And one of the unique things about our philosophy is the idea that we hope that you'll eventually outgrow a need for us. So if we can step in the gap temporarily and help with that until you don't need us, then that's in a lot of ways we've succeeded, at least in that realm. But allowing families who are through the division of labor in need of assistance, some people would hire a piano teacher, to teach, because they want their children to learn the piano, but they don't have that themselves. And there are also other subjects and areas where parents may not feel completely adequate, although I would argue that they probably are. There is that sense that you have to work through that. And so through the division of labor, we have teachers who are quality and vetted, that we can help families with. So that's really what Kepler is in a nutshell, is a platform for classical education, offering all the apparatus and the platform for teachers to do their very best work, and making that accessible to families. So with that, with Andrew reaching out and talking to us about their focus, and mentioning that Kepler was a good place, I'd like Andrew maybe to talk a little bit about the rationale behind that and say a little bit more. But I'll just preface it by saying from our side, we're delighted to get to carry that torch and allow CiRCE to continue to really lean into the things that they do best, where we have some of the platform, the facilities, the ability, I say facilities in a tech sense, to be able to facilitate this kind of work. The infrastructure is already there. So, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I can say very, I suppose bluntly maybe is the way to put it, that we had a leadership retreat in September, looked at our numbers, looked at our strategy, looked at all of our activities, and realized two things. One is we're not focused enough. And as a result, or let me maybe a better way to say it would be, we have too many activities for too few people. And as a result of that, we aren't able to do really any of the activities as well as we want to. And so we asked ourselves, is there anything we're doing that's really valuable, that we love doing, that we want to continue, but it's not core, it's not essential to who we are? And it was hard. It was very, very hard to decide on anything, because we love what we do. And also because, well, you got to trust somebody else to pick it up then, right? And when the discussion about the online academy, the CiRCE Online Academy came up, we looked at it. We said, this is a great thing. We have great teachers. There's so many benefits to this, but really it looks like something we should, what do you call it? We could not tolerate the idea of it ending, but we felt like we needed to hand it off to somebody else. And I will tell you that by the time before the decision had been formulated, as the decision was being formulated, immediately Kepler came into my mind. And I thought, those are the people we could trust. Those are people who are kindred spirit. Those are people who have high quality, who have a similar spiritual commitment, an educational commitment that we've worked with over the years, that we've always, always been happy to work with over the years. And I think it was the next day or that afternoon, I called Daniel and I said, look, we've made a really hard decision, but we think you're the ones who can make it an easy decision, if I can put it that way. And from that point forward, there's been, you get into all the legal discussions and the nitty-gritty details that lawyers have to work out. But I mean, it's been wonderful. And what is it? I think I called him the beginning of October. Is it that long ago even? Late October, maybe? Anyway, I called him immediately. The agreement of shared interest was expressed. We put together contracts. Everything moved very smoothly, very quickly. Obviously, I mean that relatively speaking, I'll say this. One thing I've learned over the years in education is that contracts are not a way to protect you from the person that you're making a contract with. They're a way to protect your relationship with that person. And so one of the things that we've been all very careful about is to make everything as clear as possible, to make sure that the whole contract is long-term, faithful, that we're all going to be able to live with it as an act of love and devotion to each other. So maybe that's an aside even, maybe that's, sausage making part of this, but it's been an incredibly, what's the word I want here? It's been an incredible sense of relief and confidence. A tremendous sense of relief that there's no risk to our teachers and our families, that they're going to continue in a really good setting, and confidence in Kepler to carry on the work that's been going on. And so, I mean, more than anything, what I'm feeling is this great big thank you to Kepler and to the families from both Kepler and CiRCE that are moving through this journey. It's weird. It was so hard, and yet now I'm so excited about it.
Well, I feel like one of the great things, as you've already expressed, is I think that trust or that
Yeah,
like-mindedness. And you and I have
yeah.
talked a little bit about this. And I mentioned a few moments ago that kind of some of our core values or philosophy, and I always hate to fall into the trap of corporate think, but a way of expressing in short order some of our shared philosophies that I think has made this relationship. And we use the term. I want to bring this up. Maybe we use the term jointure, a sort of neologism that we borrowed from medieval domestic jurisprudence, and really,
Really?
yeah.
That's where that
So
comes from.
that's where it came from. So I was just trying to think of a word because as we talked about it, we knew that we have distinct goals for our organizations, but at the same time, there was a familial sort of trust and brotherhood in what we were doing. And so Kepler is poised with the technology and the things we've been working on and developing and trying to, fine tune processes so that we can help this be as smooth as possible for families
Mhm.
and teachers, and allowing teachers really as hopefully to earn as much of the tuition as possible and take as much of the administrative burden off them as possible.
Mhm.
But we had to have a philosophical approach. We couldn't be a tech company that sold education courses. That wouldn't work in the long run, and that would be bad for what we were all in it for. And so we often say that Kepler is a platform that leverages technology, and so we're using it in the best possible way. We never want to become servant to it, but we do want it to serve our interests. And with that, I think one of the great benefits to the CiRCE teachers coming onto Kepler is our philosophy of allowing the teachers this broad approach to classical education. So we said we're mere Christian, and we don't mean barely Christian. We are very
Yeah.
we're very committed to historic Christianity and recognizing that in the spirit of theology and academia, that there are distinctives amongst the teachers, and we want those to be able to be points of not contention, but points of public discourse,
Yeah.
ways of discussing and thinking through big ideas. That's part of the whole great conversation. So we're mere Christian in that sense. We're broadly classical in that we really want to give the opportunity for teachers as we are trying to recover and renew classical education in the 21st century. We recognize there are different features of classical education at different epochs of history that are stronger and others that we haven't fully recovered. And so we want to keep it very broad in terms of letting teachers do their best work under a classical paradigm. And then historically, or what we call Burkean. I think you said Burkean to Kirkian, and now you have to mess up Scrud. The idea of we want to preserve the permanent things. There are certain contours, natural law. There's certain contours by which real progress is only progress if we're along those contours of what we've inherited, what is natural to humanity. And so we want to keep that mindset. We often have to explain that that has nothing to do with a particular political affiliation. It has to do with a
Right.
philosophy of culture and what education means. And so because we share that, CiRCE teachers have that opportunity to come and do exactly what they were doing before. There's no compromise to what they were doing before. There's very little, we hope, change or kinking their, cramping their style, so to speak. We're not going to kink the work they're doing. We're hoping that we just offer a better and more robust conduit to reach more families, with a broader, um,
Yeah.
Kepler culture. And so that's what we see on our side as a benefit to students and teachers and families is really just more focused and more developed as we've been working on the infrastructure. So that's what we're hoping to come up with. So
And Scott, if I may, the 3 points you make are so valuable. One of the when people ask me what my political school of thought is, I call myself a prudentialist, right? Because there's no language, there's no words left
Yeah.
that aren't stolen by some party, you know. I believe in a democracy that's a republic under a monarchy, whatever. I'm not an ideologist, and CiRCE is not ideological. What we are is we're committed to prudence. And the reason I mention that is because that permeates our entire approach to education. I would argue, for example, that prudence is the virtue that education is uniquely equipped, or let me even put it this way, education is the means to prudence. Consequently, if the educator isn't cultivating prudence, then nobody is. Now, obviously, you can say, well, what about the mom? What about the workshop the attendee? What about the factory worker? Well, yeah, I know, but that's when they're cultivating prudence, they're teaching. And that's part of my whole mindset. Why do we think of teaching as something that happens in a classroom? Right? Life is teaching us all the time. And to make such a radical separation between them is, I'll just say it's imprudent. And so what we need to be doing as teachers within the Christian classical renewal is, I would even make this, here, I'll put it this way. I think any lesson that you teach, you need to make sure it is adding one pebble to the wall that is going to be prudence, the virtue of prudence in the child's soul. It's adding one thread to the tapestry that is going to be that child's image of the world. It's going to help the child in some way become prudent. Or maybe if that's too abstract, let me put it this way. Every lesson you teach needs to give the child something that he can use to deliberate better, because deliberation is the means to prudence. And that's why I'm so opposed to ideological thinking and shortcut thinking and so on, is because what we need as a society, as a nation, more than anything else now, practically speaking, in terms of day-to-day activity, is we need to learn how to deliberate again. But that takes a lifetime, right? You can't decide when you get to college or when it's time to vote. You can't go, okay, now I'm going to do a quick workshop on how to deliberate. No, you have to start teaching your child to deliberate when you give him rules at 2 years old. And then you teach him a little bit more about deliberation when he's 6 and you read Aesop's fables. And then when he's in fourth grade and you start giving him a little more advanced grammar. Why grammar? Because grammar helps you deliberate. And then you get to middle school, maybe at that point in the logic stage, you're going to add Latin. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you already did. But why would you add Latin? The answer is because it helps you deliberate. And then you're going to start having Socratic discussions. Well, why are you going to do that? Because it helps you deliberate. And the one thing that you always, always need to be teaching a child is how to deliberate better. And that cultivates the wisdom of virtue. I mean, the virtue of prudence. And then the other thing I would add is that the deliberation doesn't stop with action. It's not that you deliberate so that you can act, right? You deliberate while you act.
Yes.
You deliberate with your hands. The artist knows this. The carpenter knows this. You're trying something out to see if it works, right? And that we need to approach life like that. You don't draw a conclusion and then impose it on the reality around you. And so all of that is to say that's why Christian classical education has such an enormous value, culturally speaking, right? You don't help somebody become a Christian for the sake of the culture, but it does help the culture. You don't help somebody become classical necessarily just for the sake of the culture, but it helps the culture. And the reason it does is because you keep on deliberating. You don't make some relative truth absolute, and you don't make the absolute truth relative, right? You make the absolute, well, I'm going on too much about the philosophical side, but the point is that's why deliberation is so important. And that's why I'm so happy that, again, to this discussion, that we're able to work together and that we have those three shared values, that we're mere Christian in the sense of, let's say, small e, ecumenical. We love the discourse because we can deliberate together about what we disagree on and what we agree on. And we're broadly classical because classical is well, It's a mode of inquiry. It's a spirit of inquiry, said David Hicks, right? And if you're engaged in a spirit of inquiry, you're wide open to all truth. You're wide open. You have a generous heart toward reality. You're receiving it into yourself and interpreting it and understanding it from any angle. And so you don't have an ideological classical position. You have a genuinely inquiry-driven, truth-based, inquiry-driven classical disposition, and you're
Yeah.
always cultivating prudence, deliberation, and then that is a true conservatism, which is, frankly, it's a progressive conservatism.
I love how we have to scramble all these these words that have
Crazy, isn't it?
so concrete. Well, I think, folks, that was probably worth the price of admission right there. That was wonderful. I really love having these conversations. Well, we're excited about the relationship that we have going forward, and so with online classes that CiRCE previously offered will continue to be offered in the same way, same great teachers, same great curriculum. They will just be found on a different location. You just be getting them from a different platform, checking out on a different platform. But
I was thinking, of course, being my age, when you were saying same great curriculum, same great teachers, of course, I couldn't not hear same bat time, same bat channel. And then when you said the last part, I realized, well, it's not the same great channel. It's you do have to turn the channel, but it's the same time and teachers. For those of you who are well over the hill, you'll appreciate that. The rest of you just enjoy your youth.
click the channel and it'll be programming's right over there. Well, we have some time for some questions, and I'm certain that folks, we've been emailed questions and we've tried to answer most as best we're able to, but we'd love to take questions. If you have one for us generally, we'll just pick them or we'll, pass them off to each other. But if you have one specifically for one or the other of us, feel free to type those into the chat box. I believe I've got that working now, so you should be able to type a question in there. But if you have a question about CiRCE, Kepler, this jointure, what this is going to look like, how this might affect you, we would love to answer those questions if we can. And if we've done such a great job that nobody has questions, then you can go early. But
that wouldn't mean we've done a great job. That would mean we've put people to sleep and they're not interested.
They're not even.
I take it. Yeah, absolutely. I take it personally if people don't have questions. I take it as a failure on my part. And so if you don't have any questions, I'm going to go sit in my bedroom and cry for the evening.
Somebody should at least ask Andrew why he's a prudentialist in his political. And I hear explain prudentialism from an educational standpoint, but yeah, so maybe you should ask him about that. What does that mean politically? I don't know. I'm just priming pump here.